The snow fell in thick, silent blades over Stockholm's Gamla stan that December night in 1935. In the royal palace, the great chandeliers blazed, yet one room remained dark, the velvet throne room, where the ancient ceremonial chair of the Vasa kings stood upon its dais like a sleeping beast. At precisely 11 minutes past midnight, a scream tore through the marble corridors. Princess Ingrid, only child of the Crown Prince, lay sprawled across the crimson carpet, a slender stiletto buried between her shoulder blades. Upon the velvet throne itself sat a single white gardenia and a playing card, the Queen of Spades. And Hercule Poirot, who had come to Sweden only to receive an honorary medal, found himself staring at a murder that threatened the stability of a kingdom. Chapter 1. The Gardenia on the Throne. The snow came down in heavy, deliberate flakes, as though the sky itself wished to bury Stockholm before dawn. It was the 9th of December 1935, and the wind that swept across the water from Skeppsholmen carried the bite of the Arctic. In the narrow alleys of Gamla stan, the gas lamps hissed and flickered, throwing long, trembling shadows over the cobblestones. But inside the royal palace, every chandelier blazed, turning night into a feverish noon. Yet one room remained stubbornly dark, the velvet throne room, where the ancient ceremonial chair of the Vasa kings stood upon its dais, like a black altar beneath a dust sheet of shadow. At 11 minutes past midnight, a woman's scream rose, thin and high, slicing through marble corridors and gilded salons with the precision of a scalpel. It was a sound that belonged to no polite drawing room. It was the sound a soul makes when it understands too late that death has already entered the room. Footmen froze with silver trays in their hands. A lady-in-waiting dropped an entire tier of petit four. Somewhere a clock began to chime the quarter hour, and then, as though frightened by what it had heard, fell silent. Captain Arthur Hastings, formerly of His Majesty's forces, and currently lodged in a suite at the Grand Hotel with his friend Hercule Poirot, was awakened by an urgent hammering at the door. He stumbled out of bed, struggled into a dressing gown the colour of Burgundy wine, and opened to find a palace footman white as the snow outside. "Captain Hastings, sir, begging your pardon, His Majesty requests the immediate presence of Monsieur Poirot. There has been an incident." Hastings needed no further explanation. The man's pupils were wide with terror. He turned back into the sitting room where Poirot, who required remarkably little sleep, was already fully dressed in a charcoal-grey overcoat with an astrakhan collar, twirling his moustache before the mirror with calm precision. "You have heard, mon ami?" Poirot asked without turning. "I heard a scream that could have wakened the dead," Hastings replied, though apparently it failed. "Then let us go swiftly. Royalty, like pâté de foie gras, does not improve by being kept waiting." 20 minutes later their sleigh, it was the fastest way through the clogged streets, drew up beneath the great northern portico of the palace. Torches flared in the hands of guards whose breath hung in the air like white banners. Inspector Lars Bergström of the Stockholm Kriminalpolisen waited at the top of the marble steps, his huge frame bundled in reindeer fur, his pale Nordic eyes reflecting the torchlight like chips of glacier ice. "Monsieur Poirot," he said in careful French, "I am relieved beyond words that you are in Sweden. We have a murder that threatens the stability of the realm." Poirot inclined his head with that small regal gesture that always made Hastings smile inwardly. "Lead on, Inspector. The little grey cells are impatient." They passed through halls where portraits of long-dead monarchs, Gustavus Adolphus, Christina, Karl der Fuhlten, stared down with painted disapproval. Courtiers clustered in whispering knots, the women clutching one another's sleeves, the men rigid with the particular pallor that comes when ancient privilege suddenly feels fragile. The air smelled of beeswax, fir boughs, and fear. At last they reached the west wing. A pair of sentries stood before a set of double doors bound with iron. Beyond them lay a corridor that had been sealed since 11 o'clock for reasons of state security. Bergström produced a single large key, turned it in the lock, and the doors swung inward with a sigh, as though the palace itself exhaled. The corridor was long and narrow, lit by a row of sconces whose flames barely disturbed the darkness. 5 doors opened off the left-hand side. On the right, tall windows looked down upon an inner courtyard, already knee-deep in snow. At the far end, another sealed door matched the one behind them. The air was colder here, as though winter had been invited indoors and given a permanent chair. Bergström led them to the 3rd door on the left. It stood ajar. Inside was the velvet throne room. Hastings had expected something grander, but the chamber was intimate to the point of claustrophobia. Dark panelling rose to a painted ceiling depicting Odin and the gods long banished by Lutheran severity. In the centre, upon a low dais, reached by 3 crimson-carpeted steps, stood the throne itself, oak blackened by 6 centuries. Upholstered in velvet, the colour of spilled wine, its high back carved into writhing serpents, and crowned by a gilt coronet. Even in the gloom it seemed to pulse with antiquity. And at its foot lay Princess Ingrid. She was on her side, one arm flung out as though she had tried to ward off the blow, the other curled protectively across her breast. Her gown, silver lame over palest rose, had ridden up to reveal one slender ankle in a crystal-buckled shoe. The stiletto, Italian 16th century, its pommel a snarling lion, was buried to the hilt between her shoulder blades, at an angle no accidental fall could explain. A thin ribbon of blood had traced its way across the lame and soaked into the carpet like ink into blotting paper. Her eyes, wide and cornflower blue, stared at the throne with an expression it took Hastings a moment to recognize. Not fear, but betrayal. Upon the seat of the throne itself rested a single perfect white gardenia, its petals luminous against the dark velvet. And beside it, placed with deliberate care, lay a playing card, the Queen of Spades. Poirot stood motionless for a long moment, absorbing the scene the way a composer absorbs silence before the first note. Then he moved forward with that mincing, cat-like tread that always made taller men feel clumsy. "Precision," he murmured. "Regardez, Hastings. The flower is fresh. Dew still clings to the petals. Yet gardenias do not bloom in Sweden in December. The dagger enters at a 45-degree angle, delivered by a right-handed person of medium height with considerable knowledge of anatomy. The blood has not yet congealed. Death occurred within the last hour. And the card. Observe how the Queen's face has been subtly altered with a pen, a tear drawn beneath one eye. Someone wished us to understand that this Queen weeps." He knelt, careful not to disturb the fall of the gown, and touched 2 fingers to the carpet beside the body. When he raised them, they were faintly dusted with white. "Snow," he said softly. "Brought in on the shoes of the murderer, perhaps. Yet the windows are sealed, and the corridor locked." Bergström cleared his throat. The west wing was cleared at 11 o'clock. Only 5 persons remained within. Her Royal Highness Princess Ingrid, her fiancé Count Axel von Rosen, his sister Fruken, Greta von Rosen, Baroness Ebba Silverström, and the royal physician Dr. Niels Forslund. The end doors were locked and the key given to the princess herself for privacy. No one else could enter or leave. Poirot's eyes gleamed. 5 suspects, 1 key, a room locked from the inside, yet a murder committed, and a gardenia that should not exist. Déjà, the little grey cells begin to dance. He rose and approached the throne. With infinite delicacy, he lifted the gardenia and inhaled its heavy, funereal scent. "From a hothouse," he murmured, "and not any hothouse. This is the Camellia sinensis strain known as Augusta, cultivated exclusively at Silverström Manor by Baroness Ebba herself. There are no more than 20 plants in existence. Someone has been borrowing." He replaced the flower exactly as he had found it and turned his attention to the Queen of Spades. The card was of French manufacture, heavy stock, the back patterned in midnight blue and gold. The corner was bent as though it had long marked a place in a book. Hastings, who had been staring in horrified fascination at the body, suddenly noticed something else. "Poirot, look at the carpet near the dais. There are footprints." They were faint, almost lost among the elaborate weave, but unmistakable. The narrow, elegant print of a woman's evening slipper, the heel leaving a deeper impression as though the wearer had stood for some time in contemplation or triumph before the throne. Poirot followed the prints with his eyes. They led from the body to the dais, paused, and then returned, overlapping themselves as though the murderer had paced in agitation before finally departing the room. "Curious," Poirot said. "The princess wore silver shoes with crystal buckles, size 36. These prints are 38, and the arch is higher. Someone else stood here after the murder. Someone who wished to survey their handiwork." Bergström made a note in a small black book. "We took statements already. All 5 claimed to have been in their rooms when the scream came." Poirot smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "Naturally. The guilty always have the best alibis, until they do not. Tell me, Inspector, at what precise moment did the scream occur?" 12:14, according to the footman who raised the alarm. He was passing the end door when he heard it. "And the palace clocks, what do they say now?" Bergström glanced at his wristwatch and frowned. "Every clock in the West Wing stopped at 12:11. We assumed coincidence." "There is no coincidence," Poirot said gently. "Only facts that have not yet introduced themselves. Someone wished to confuse the time of death. Someone, perhaps, who understood that time itself can be a weapon." He moved to one of the tall windows. The latch was closed, but when he examined it closely, he gave a soft exclamation. "Regardez! The screws have been loosened recently. The brass is bright where the screwdriver bit. This window was opened from the outside and then carefully refastened. Yet we are 3 stories above the courtyard, and the wall is smooth marble." Hastings peered out. Snow had drifted against the glass, but beneath the window, the courtyard lay white and unmarked, save for a single set of footprints leading to the wall directly below, and stopping there. "Impossible," Hastings breathed. "No ladder, no rope marks. How the devil did they get up or down?" Poirot tapped the glass thoughtfully with one manicured finger. "Exactly, mon ami. How the devil indeed!" He turned back to the room, his gaze sweeping over every detail. The overturned chair near the fireplace, the single champagne flute lying on its side, the faint scent of violet ink that seemed to linger beneath the heavier perfume of blood and gardenia. "One more thing," he said almost to himself. "The princess clutches something in her left hand." Carefully, he opened the stiffening fingers. Within lay a torn fragment of heavy cream notepaper, the kind used for formal correspondence. Only 3 words were visible, written in violet ink in a sloping, educated hand. Must fall tonight. Poirot slipped the fragment into an envelope with the same reverence a priest might show a relic. Bergström watched him, a mixture of awe and frustration on his face. "You see more in 5 minutes, monsieur, than my men have seen in an hour." "I see only what is there to be seen," Poirot replied. "But what is there? Ah, that is another matter. Come, it is time to meet our 5 nightingales in their separate cages. One of them, Inspecteur, sings a song of murder, and Hercule Poirot intends to provide the accompaniment." As they left the velvet throne room, Hastings glanced back once more. In the flickering candlelight, the gardenia seemed to glow with its own cold luminescence, and the Queen of Spades stared up at the painted gods with her single drawn tear. Outside in the corridor, the snow had begun to drift against the windows, soft and relentless as forgetting. But inside that locked wing, Hastings knew the past had just reached forward with blood-stained fingers and claimed another victim. And somewhere among the 5 who remained, the murderer waited, listening to approaching footsteps, wondering which of them would be next to hear the little Belgian say, in his voice soft as gentle as falling snow, "You have made a mistake, madame, or monsieur, and Hercule Poirot, he does not permit mistakes." Chapter 2. The Queen of Spades. The small yellow salon lay at the eastern end of the sealed corridor, a room designed for intimate audiences and uncomfortable truths. A fire crackled with unnecessary violence in the white marble grate, throwing restless shadows across walls hung with lemon silk now faded to the color of old bones. 5 people waited there, arranged like pieces on a chessboard no one had dared touch since the scream. They rose as Poirot entered. 5 pale faces reflecting the same thought. Which of us will he unmask first? Count Axel von Rosen stood nearest the windows, tall and fair, the perfect Nordic prince from a child's storybook, yet his dress uniform unbuttoned at the throat, as though the golden collar had suddenly become too tight for breath or for lies. His eyes were red-rimmed, but whether from grief or sleepless calculation, it was impossible to tell. Beside him, protectively close, yet not quite touching, stood his sister Greta, dark where he was light, her black velvet gown absorbing what little warmth the room possessed. Baroness Ebersilferstrom occupied the high-backed settee like a malevolent spider in jet and diamonds, her cane planted between her feet as though ready to strike. Dr. Niels Forsland hovered near the door, thin shoulders twitching each time the fire spat, spectacles flashing whenever he turned his head too quickly. An empty chair, small and gilded, waited for the woman who would never occupy it again. Poirot did not sit. He placed the Queen of Spades upon the tambour table in the centre of the room. Face up, the tiny inked tear beneath her painted eye, now clearly visible to everyone. The silence that followed was so complete that Hastings could hear the snow ticking against the window panes like impatient fingers. "This card," Poirot began, voice soft yet carrying to every corner, "was found beside the body of Her Royal Highness. It is not, you understand, an ordinary playing card. The stock is French, from the House of B. Dondorf, 1929 print run, supplied exclusively to the Casino de Paris and certain private clubs in Berlin. Very few decks reached Sweden, and this particular queen has been annotated. A tear, mesdames et messieurs. Someone wished us to know that the queen weeps." He let the words settle, watching each face the way a card-sharp watches for the tell that betrays a bluff. Count Axel spoke first, the words scraping out of a throat raw with unshed grief or rehearsed remorse. Ingrid received an identical card yesterday morning. It arrived with the post, no envelope, only her name written in violet ink. On the reverse, the message, "The Queen must fall before the new year." Greta von Rosen laid a gloved hand on her brother's arm, but her eyes never left Poirot. She laughed at it, said it was a student prank from her days at Uppsala, someone jealous of the engagement. She pinned the card to her dressing-table mirror with a brooch and forgot it. Forgot? Poirot echoed gently. Yet the brooch is now missing, and the original card has vanished from her apartments between the sealing of the wing at 11 and the discovery of the body at 12:14. Curious forgetfulness, no? Baroness Silverstrom gave a sound halfway between laugh and snarl. Ingrid collected enemies the way other women collect pearls. She intended to renounce her claim to the throne for love, a bourgeois notion that offended every tradition we possess. Half the aristocracy would have cheerfully posted such a card. Yet only one, Poirot murmured, followed the threat with a dagger. Dr. Forsland removed his spectacles, breathed on them, polished them with a handkerchief that trembled. As the princess's physician, I feel I should say. She had been anxious these past weeks, nightmares. She spoke of seeing a woman in the mirrors, wearing her face but weeping blood. Greta flinched as though struck. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You were close to Her Royal Highness, mademoiselle." "We were friends since childhood," Greta answered steadily. "She confided in me." "Then perhaps you can explain why the princess, only hours before her death, wrote in her private diary, now missing, I regret to say, that she intended to break the engagement after all, that she feared someone in this very room wished her not merely dethroned but dead." Axel took one involuntary step forward. "That is a lie, is it?" Poirot produced a single torn page, the violet ink still fragrant. "Her handwriting is unmistakable. The entry is dated yesterday. She names no names, but she writes, 'I have seen the gardenia, and I understand at last. Tonight I will confront the serpent in my garden.'" The fire cracked like a pistol shot. No one moved. Poirot turned the Queen of Spades over with one finger. On the back, almost invisible against the midnight pattern, someone had drawn a tiny gardenia in the same violet ink. "Two messages," he said. "One public, the card sent through the post. One private, this delicate flower, added later, after the princess thought herself safe within a locked wing. Someone among you knew she had begun to suspect. Someone needed to silence her before that suspicion became certainty." He looked slowly from face to face. "Count Axel, you were heard quarrelling with the princess at 20 minutes to 12. Voices raised, a door slammed. You claim it was merely lovers' tiff?" Axel's jaw worked. "She accused me of marrying her for the crown. I lost my temper. I left her alive and furious. Fröken Greta, a footman saw you leave the West Wing at 2 minutes to 12, returning only after the alarm. You say you went for migraine powders?" "I did," Greta answered, chin high. "My head was splitting." "Yet the dispensary log shows no powders removed. And your shoes, mademoiselle, may I?" Before she could protest, he bent with surprising swiftness and touched the hem of her gown. When he straightened, flakes of snow glittered on his glove like tiny diamonds. Snow that has not yet melted. You were outside, in the courtyard, at the very moment your friend was murdered. Greta's breath caught. but she said nothing. "Baroness, your maid confirms you dismissed her at 11:30, saying you wished to be alone. Yet the fire in your room was dead cold when police entered. Where were you?" The old woman's lips curled. "Dreams of empire, little man. Nothing more. And you, Dr. Forsland? Your medical bag contains traces of the same violet ink used for the death threat. An odd colour for prescriptions, no?" The doctor went the shade of old parchment. I sometimes illustrate botanical texts. Gardenias are a particular interest." Poirot stepped back, hands clasped behind him. 5 people, 5 motives, glimmering like knives beneath silk. A card that weeps, a flower that should not exist, and a queen who understood too much. Too late, the little grey cells. They whisper that one of you returned to that room after the murder, not to mourn, but to search. The missing diary, the original card, perhaps something more damning still. He picked up the Queen of Spades once more, turning it so the firelight caught the inked tear. Tomorrow, or rather today, the princess was to announce formally her intention to abdicate in order to marry. Instead, she lies dead, and the throne remains empty. Someone in this room has achieved exactly what they desired. But desire, mes amis, is a dangerous mistress. She always demands one more sacrifice. He laid the card down again, the queen staring sightlessly at the painted ceiling. And Hercule Poirot, he does not permit a second murder, not while the first still bleeds. Outside the windows the snow kept falling, soft as forgiveness, relentless as truth. Inside the yellow salon no one spoke. They only watched the small Belgian with the magnificent moustaches and waited for the next card to fall. Chapter 3. 5 doors, 1 key. The west wing corridor felt colder now, as though the palace itself had begun to mourn. Snow pressed against the tall windows like a living thing trying to force its way inside. And the sconces burned with a low, sullen flame that barely reached the vaulted ceiling. Poirot walked the length slowly, hands clasped behind his back, the single brass key swinging from a ribbon in Bergstrom's huge fist like a pendulum counting down to judgment. 5 doors on the left, 5 windows on the right, and at each end a heavy oak door secured by that same key. A perfect rectangle of marble and gilt transformed into a cage. Poirot stopped at the first window and peered down into the courtyard 3 stories below. Fresh snow lay smooth and unmarked, except for one set of footprints narrow, deep-heeled, that began beneath the 3rd window, walked 10 paces toward the centre, and then simply stopped, as though the walker had been lifted bodily into the night. No ladder marks, no rope, no disturbance of the drifts along the wall. Only absence. "Impossible," Bergstrom muttered, breath fogging. "My men searched every inch. No one climbed." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Precisely, Inspector. No one climbed, yet someone was there." He scraped a gloved fingertip along the window frame and examined the faint silver-grey threads that came away. Lame. The same fabric as the princess's gown. Curious, no? He moved on, pausing at each door in turn. Princess Ingrid's apartments now sealed with red police tape, Count Axel's suite, Greta von Rosen's rooms, Baroness Silverstrom's guest chamber, and finally Dr. Forsland's temporary office. All opened easily from the inside. Only the end doors required the key from the corridor side. Poirot tested each latch with delicate precision, humming under his breath. Inside the princess's apartments, the chaos had been tidied by careful police hands, but the sense of violation remained. Drawers stood half open. Cushions bore the imprint of hurried searching fingers. A crystal flask of perfume had been overturned, and its ghost jasmine and something darker still haunted the air. On the desk lay the empty jewel case, lid yawning like a mouth that had screamed itself hoarse. Poirot knelt beside the window directly opposite the velvet throne room. The latch showed bright scratches where a knife or jemmy had been inserted. When he swung the casement open, a blade of icy air cut through the room, swirling papers on the desk. Snow had drifted onto the parquet in a perfect fan shape, and in that snow were footprints again narrow, high-arched, size 38, leading from the window to the connecting door into the throne room and back again. Someone entered here after death, Poirot murmured, stood perhaps contemplating the body, then searched these rooms before departing the same impossible way. Yet the courtyard prints stop 20 feet from the wall. How does one descend 3 stories without touching snow? He closed the window and turned his attention to the carpet. Between the 2 rooms ran a trail of damp marks, almost invisible now, but unmistakable to eyes trained to see. He followed them into the velvet throne room, where the great chair squatted in accusing silence. The gardenia had been removed for evidence, but its perfume lingered, heavy and funereal. Poirot circled the dais slowly. The footprints here were clearer, the same woman's evening slipper overlapping themselves in agitation before the throne. One set paused directly in front of the seat, the toe pointing toward the hidden compartment Poirot had already discovered but not yet revealed. Someone had known, or suspected, the throne's secret. He bent suddenly and brushed the velvet cushion with his palm. A few pale fibres clung to the nap-silver lame again. Someone wearing a gown of the exact fabric as the princess had sat here, briefly, after the murder. Not the princess herself, her body had never been moved onto the throne. Someone else had taken the dead woman's place, if only for a moment. Bergström watched, baffled. "You are saying the murderer returned?" "I am saying, mon ami, that the murderer never left. Not completely. Observe." Poirot pointed to the ornate brass key now lying on a side table for fingerprint examination. This key was found in the princess's pocket, yet the corridor was locked from the outside at both ends. To lock oneself inside a sealed wing with only one key requires genius or madness, or, he smiled his small cat smile, a second key. He moved to the fireplace. The ashes were cold, but when he stirred them with the poker, a scrap of half-burnt vellum fluttered up cream-coloured, heavy, the corner embossed with the royal crest. Only 3 words remained legible in violet ink. "The throne remembers." Bergström swore softly in Swedish. Poirot pocketed the fragment. Someone attempted to destroy evidence, yet fire, like murder, is rarely thorough. He turned to the windows again. "Now let us examine the impossible ascent." Outside in the corridor, he requested a ladder from the palace staff. When it arrived, he had it placed beneath the 3rd window, the one with the courtyard footprints directly below. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he climbed nimbly to the top and examined the stone coping that ran along the exterior wall at 4th floor level. Ah! His cry of satisfaction brought them all running. Caught in a crevice between 2 blocks of masonry was a torn scrap of silver lame, fluttering like a tiny flag of surrender. And wedged beside it, almost invisible against the snow, a single white gardenia petal. Poirot descended carefully, brushing snow from his overcoat. "Regardez, the coping is wide enough for a determined person to edge along sideways." From the princess's window to the next Count Axel's suite, then Greta's rooms, then the Baroness's, any of those windows could be opened from inside. Our murderer entered through the princess's window, committed the crime, searched, then departed along the coping to another room, whose occupant either assisted or slept ignorantly. The footprints in the courtyard? A deliberate blind someone walked outward 10 paces, and then retraced their steps exactly, creating the illusion of vanishing. Bergström stared at the wall as though it had betrayed him. But the risk! In this weather, in evening dress, love and hate make acrobats of us all, Poirot said softly. And one more thing. He pointed to faint scratches on the coping visible only when the light caught them at the correct angle. Silk rope, perhaps, or knotted bedsheets dyed silver to blend with the gown, pulled up after use and carried away. That is how one descends without touching snow. He led them back inside, pausing at Greta von Rosen's door. It stood slightly ajar, though police had sealed it earlier. Inside, the room was in disarray, drawers emptied. A gown of silver lame tossed across the bed like a discarded skin. On the floor lay a single white kid glove, stained with something dark that had dried to rust. Poirot picked it up delicately. Blood, I think, and gardenia perfume. Someone changed here after the murder, burning or hiding the evidence, but haste makes waste, as you English say. He turned to Bergström. From this moment, no one leaves the West Wing. The net tightens. And somewhere in these 5 rooms is the second key or the rope, or the diary the princess wrote before she died. Find them, Inspector, and we find our murderer. As they moved toward the Baroness's chamber, Poirot paused beneath a sconce and looked back along the corridor. In the wavering light, the 5 doors seemed to watch them, patient as spiders. Somewhere behind one of them, he knew. The killer listened to every footstep, every heartbeat, calculating how much time remained before the little Belgian with the magnificent moustaches turned the only key that mattered, the key of truth, and opened the door to judgment. The snow kept falling. The corridor held its breath. And the game, Poirot reflected with a small, grim smile, had only just begun. Chapter 4. The Baroness and the Broken Alibis, Baroness Ebersilferström, received them seated in a high-backed ebony chair that might have served as a throne in a smaller kingdom. Black lace draped over her shoulders like a mourning veil. She had worn so long it had become part of her skin. The chamber assigned to her was the grandest in the West Wing, tapestries of the 30 Years' War, a bed with twisted posts carved into dragons, a fire that roared as though trying to escape the chimney. The air was thick with beeswax and old roses, and something metallic beneath the scent of power that has never quite accepted it might one day end. She did not rise. She barely inclined her head, diamonds flashing at her throat like tiny warning shots. Age had shrunk her body, but not her presence. She filled the room the way a battleship fills a harbour. Poirot bowed with exquisite politeness, Hastings with the slight stiffness of a soldier who dislikes taking orders from anyone not in uniform, Bergström with the wary respect a policeman reserves for those who can ruin him with a telephone call. Madame la Baronne, Poirot began, placing his gloves and hat upon a marble console as delicately as if they were made of Sèvres porcelain. We intrude upon your grief. Grief? The Baroness's voice was dry leaves scraping over gravel. I mourn the monarchy, monsieur, not one wilful girl who mistook sentiment for destiny. Ask what you must and be quick. I am old and the night is long. Poirot's smile did not reach his eyes. Then let us speak of time. You informed Inspector Bergström that you played bridge in the Queen's apartments until 12:30, with Her Majesty, the Queen Dowager, Princess Sibylla, and His Excellency the Austrian Minister. A most distinguished table, precisely. Yet the game concluded at 7 minutes past 12, when Her Majesty retired with one of her migraines. The score sheet signed by all 4 players records the final rubber ending at 12:07. And yet Poirot produced a folded sheet from his waistcoat with the flourish of a conjurer. Here is the duplicate sheet from the palace steward, showing a rubber mysteriously completed at 12:29. The times have been altered in violet ink, the same ink, I regret to say, used for the death threat. Someone, madame, has forged your alibi. The Baroness's cane tapped once upon the parquet, sharp as a judge's gavel. Then one of the others is the forger. I was at cards until I retired. Impossible, Poirot said gently. Because the Queen Dowager's maid confirms Her Majesty took to her bed at 12:05 and was given laudanum immediately. Princess Sibylla left at 12:06, complaining of the cold. The Austrian minister departed for his legation at 12:08, swearing audibly in 3 languages. You played alone, madame, with ghosts for partners. For the first time, the old woman's composure flickered. I may have dozed. Memory plays tricks at my age. Memory is selective, not treacherous. Poirot moved closer, the firelight catching the green in his eyes. Let us speak instead of gardenias. Your winter garden at Silverstrom Manor is famous the only place in Sweden where Gardenia jasminoides augusta blooms in December. 11 perfect specimens were cut 3 days ago for your journey to Stockholm. 11 remain in the vase upon your dressing table. 1 was found upon the velvet throne beside the body. Where, madam, is the 12th? The Baroness's knuckles whitened upon the serpent head of her cane. I sent none to the princess. She disliked the scent, reminded her of funerals. Yet someone harvested a bloom tonight. The stem was cut with nail scissors, your nail scissors. Engraved with your initials, which your maid reports missing since 11 o'clock. Poirot produced a small mother-of-pearl pear in an evidence envelope. A trace of green sap still clung to the blades. The Baroness stared at the scissors as though they were an asp. Anyone might have taken them. Anyone who knew they were kept in the lacquered box upon your escritoire. Anyone, perhaps, who visited you after the wing was sealed. Poirot's voice dropped to the register he used in the confessional. Tell me, madame, why do you hate the princess enough to kill her? A laugh, dry and terrible, escaped the old woman. Hate? I pitied her. She would have sold 1,000 years of history for a penniless count with a handsome face. The von Rosens are noble, yes, but ruined debts, gambling, scandal thinly veiled by good manners. Ingrid's marriage would have dragged the crown into the gutter. I merely wished to prevent catastrophe. By murdering the heir. By reminding her of duty. The Baroness leaned forward, eyes blazing. I went to her at 11:30. We spoke, argued through the connecting door. She refused to listen. I returned here furious. That is all. Poirot regarded her steadily. You returned here, yes, but not immediately. A footman saw a woman in black lace crossing the courtyard at 5 minutes to 12. Your height, your limp, your cane tapping upon the snow. You went outside, madame, despite the storm. Why? The Baroness sat very still. The fire chose that moment to collapse in a shower of sparks. I needed air, she said at last. Air perfumed with gardenia. Poirot stepped to the window. The latch hung loose, screws bright where they had been recently turned. Snow had drifted across the sill in a perfect curve. You opened this window tonight. Footprints beneath led to the exact spot where the courtyard prints begin your footprints, madame, before you carefully retraced them to create the illusion of vanishing. You climbed, yes, even at your age, along the coping to the princess's room. You are stronger than you appear. I have seen you ride to hounds at 70. You entered, you quarrelled again. You stabbed her with the dagger you had carried from the armoury earlier in the evening, wrapped in your lace shawl. Perhaps you placed the gardenia and the card. You returned the same way, and you sat here, forging your bridge score, while the clock stopped and the palace screamed. The Baroness rose with astonishing dignity. You have no proof. I have fibres of black lace caught upon the coping. I have gardenia sap upon your scissors. I have your forged bridge sheet in your handwriting. And I have Poirot produced a final object, a small crystal phial stoppered with gold yushes. Laudanum, madame, from your own travelling case. Enough to drug an entire table of bridge players had they truly remained. You intended to silence witnesses who never existed. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the casement. Then the Baroness smiled, a terrible thing that had nothing to do with mirth. You are clever, little Belgian, too clever perhaps, but you forget one thing. I am the last of my line. I have no heir, no one to protect. Kill me if you must, the monarchy will thank you for removing an embarrassment, but the throne will still be empty, and the secret it hides will die with me. She reached for the bell pull, but Poirot was faster. He caught her wrist with surprising strength. No, madame, the throne has already spoken to Hercule Poirot, and it remembers everything. He released her and stepped back, bowing once more, this time with finality. Bergstrom moved forward to take her arm, but the Baroness shook him off. She walked to the fireplace unaided, straightened her spine until she seemed to grow taller, and stared into the flames as though seeing there the burning of cities. "Tell the king," she said without turning, "that Ebba Silverstrom regrets nothing. Sweden will be cleaner without that girl's sentimental heart beating at its centre." Poirot regarded her for a long moment, something almost like pity in his eyes. "Sweden, perhaps, but you, madame, you will carry the weight of a dead child upon your conscience until the day you yourself sit upon a colder throne." He turned on his heel and left the room without another word. Hastings followed, shaken. Bergstrom remained to place the Baroness under formal arrest. In the corridor, the snow had stopped falling. Dawn was still hours away, but already the palace felt lighter, as though a poison had been drawn. Yet Poirot's face was grim. "She did not do it," he said quietly. Hastings stared. "But the evidence, too much evidence, mon ami, too perfectly arranged. The Baroness is guilty of hatred, of arrogance, of wishing the princess dead, but not of killing her. Someone placed the gardenia, the scissors, the forged score, knowing we would come to this room. Someone who understood that an old lioness makes the perfect scapegoat." He looked back toward the closed door, where the Baroness waited for her guards. "We have been led by the nose, Hastings, and the true murderer, he or she, laughs at us behind one of the remaining doors." The corridor stretched before them, silent and accusing. 4 doors now, 1 key still missing, and somewhere in the darkness the real serpent coiled, waiting to strike again. Chapter 5. The Count's Blood-Stained Gloves. The library lay at the far end of the west wing, a long room panelled in dark walnut and smelling of leather, cigar smoke, and centuries of privileged despair. A single lamp burned upon the massive desk, throwing a pool of gold across scattered papers and the silver flask that stood open, half empty, breathing brandy into the cold air. Count Axel von Rosen stood before the fireplace, feeding something to the flames with the methodical care of a man performing a ritual he no longer believed in, The fire accepted his offering greedily, curling black edges inward, turning white kid leather into ash. He did not turn when the door opened. Only when Poirot's reflection appeared in the great gilt mirror above the mantel did the Count speak, voice raw. "Come to arrest me, monsieur. It would simplify everything. The Republicans will cheer, the King will sigh with relief, and my sister can return to our crumbling estate and pretend none of this ever happened." Poirot closed the door softly, excluding Bergstrom and Hastings with a small, imperative gesture. For once, he wished to be alone with his quarry. He crossed the turkey carpet until he stood beside the Count, close enough to smell the brandy on his breath and the sharper coppery scent beneath. "You burn evidence, mon comte. That is never wise." Axel gave a cracked laugh. "Evidence of clumsiness, perhaps. I found her, you see. I pulled the dagger free, fool, that I am trying to stop the blood that would not stop. My gloves," he held up his bare hands as though surprised to find them empty. "They were soaked. I could not bear to look at them." Poirot bent swiftly and, with the poker, rescued a fragment from the edge of the great white kid, dark-stained, the monogram AVR still legible in faded gold. He held it to the light. "Curious. The blood is type AB negative, the rarest in Sweden, shared by the princess and, I believe, by yourself. Yet the stain is on the outside of the right thumb and forefinger only, as though you grasped something already bloody, rather than plunged the blade yourself. And here a smear of crimson on the inside of the cuff. You wiped the dagger clean before replacing it in her back, non?" Axel turned then, pale as the snow outside, the firelight carving hollows beneath his cheekbones. "I told you. I tried to help her." "You told Inspector Bergstrom you quarrelled violently at 11:40, that you slammed out of her apartments and did not return. Yet the footman on duty heard your voice again at 5 minutes past 12, angrier, closer, coming from inside the velvet throne room. You went back, Count. Why?" For a moment, Axel seemed about to deny everything. Then his shoulders sagged, and the aristocrat dissolved, leaving only a man in a crumpled uniform who had lost the only thing that ever made the world bearable. "She telephoned me," he said at last, "from her private line. She was crying something Ingrid never did. She said she had found proof that someone in the palace intended to kill her before morning, that the gardenia was a signature she now understood. She begged me to come. I ran through the corridors like a madman. The connecting door into the throne room was unlocked. I found her, God, the blood on the carpet. The dagger was already in her back. I pulled it out, tried to staunch the wound with my hands, my gloves. Nothing worked. She looked up at me and whispered, 'Not you, Axel. Promise me, not you.' Then she died." Poirot's gaze never wavered. And the person who stabbed her, where were they? Gone, vanished. I swear the room was empty. Yet the corridor was locked at both ends. The windows were latched from within. You expect me to believe a murderer entered, killed the princess, and evaporated like morning mist? Axel laughed again. A terrible sound. "I no longer expect anyone to believe anything. Look at me, ruined title, ruined fortune, and now the woman I loved dead by my own family's antique dagger. Of course I am guilty. The Republicans will say I killed her to force the king to abdicate in favor of a constitutional assembly. The Royalists will say I killed her because she discovered I was selling secrets to Berlin. Take your choice, monsieur. Both are lies, but lies are all that remain." He reached for the brandy flask. Poirot intercepted the movement, gently but firmly. Tell me instead about the letters you burned earlier before the gloves. I smelled the paper. Vellum. Expensive. Scented faintly with violet ink. Axel's hand trembled. Love letters. From Ingrid to another man. She was ending it tonight, the engagement, everything. She wanted to give me the letters so there would be no scandal. I burned them because I could not bear to read how easily she discarded me. Yet you kept one. Poirot drew from his pocket a single sheet rescued from the waste-paper basket, creased, tear-stained, the ink blurred in places. The handwriting was Ingrid's, unmistakable. Forgive me, my darling, but I have been living a lie. The throne is a colder lover than I knew, and Axel deserves the truth. Tonight I will tell him everything. After that, I am yours, whatever the cost. The signature was a single initial. G. Axel stared at the letter as though it were a death warrant. G for Greta, he whispered, my own sister. Poirot folded the letter with care. You begin to see, perhaps. The quarrel at 11:40 overheard by half the palace was staged. The second quarrel at 12:05, heard only by the footman, was real. Someone wished you to be the perfect suspect, the jealous fiancé discovered with blood on his hands. Someone who knew you would burn the gloves, the letters yourself if necessary, to protect the family name. Axel sank into a leather armchair, face buried in his hands. Greta adored Ingrid. They were inseparable. Adoration and hatred are often the same coin, mon comte. One merely turns it over. Poirot moved to the window. The gare courtyard lay white and silent below. Your sister was seen outside at 11:58. She claims migraine powders. Yet her shoes were wet when she returned, and gardenia petals were found later in her pocket. She had access to the Baroness's scissors, to the armoury dagger, to the hidden compartment in the throne. She is the only person whose height and shoe size match the footprints on the carpet and the coping. Axel looked up, eyes wild. You are saying my sister killed the woman she loved. I am saying love can curdle into something darker when it discovers it will never be returned. Princess Ingrid intended to renounce the throne for you, Count. But in this letter she renounces you for Greta. Imagine the betrayal to be discarded not for duty, but for a woman. Imagine the rage. He let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Axel rose suddenly and crossed to a wall safe, concealed behind a portrait of Gustav III. His fingers shook so violently he could barely work the combination. At last the door swung open. Inside lay a small velvet box. He opened it with reverence, a single white gardenia, pressed flat, the petals browned but still fragrant. She gave me this on the night she accepted my proposal, he said. Said it would remind me that even in winter love can bloom. I kept it like a fool. Poirot closed the box gently. And tonight, someone placed a fresh one on the throne, a mockery perhaps, or a signature. Your sister has been signing her work, Count, first with the Queen of Spades, now with gardenias. Axel stared at the withered flower, as though seeing it for the first time. Then, very carefully, he placed the box upon the desk. Do what you must, monsieur. Only spare her the worst. She is all to the family I have left. Poirot regarded him for a long moment, something almost human softening the green eyes. Family, mon comte, is sometimes the sharpest dagger of all. He turned to leave. At the door he paused. One last thing. The blood on your gloves, it will clear you of the stabbing itself, but not of the crime of loving too much and seeing too little. The door closed softly behind him. In the library, the fire settled into embers, and Count Axel von Rosen remained alone with the ashes of his gloves, his letters, and the ghost of a gardenia that should never have bloomed in winter. Outside in the corridor, Poirot walked slowly, the withered flower in its box heavy in his pocket, and the little grey cells whispered a name he was not yet ready to speak aloud. The net was drawing tighter. Soon, very soon, the serpent would strike again or be crushed beneath the heel of truth. Chapter 6. The Doctor Who Arrived Too Late. Dr. Niels Forslund's temporary office was a narrow chamber that had once been a confessional for visiting Catholic princes. The grilled windows still looked onto the private chapel, and the air carried the faint memory of incense, now overpowered by carbolic, morphine, and the sweet-rot smell of fear. The doctor stood at a deal table, littered with vials, a microscope, and a half-dissected white gardenia whose petals lay like tiny corpses beneath the lamp. When Poirot entered alone, closing the door with the soft finality of a coffin lid, Forslund flinched as though the scalpel in his hand had turned against him. "Forgive the intrusion, Doctor," Poirot said, removing neither coat nor hat. "But time, like blood, congeals quickly. We must speak before either sets." Forslund laid the scalpel down with exaggerated care. His hands trembled so violently that the blade rang against the marble. "I have already given my statement twice. I was telephoned at 3 minutes past 12. I dressed. I drove through the storm. I arrived at 17 minutes past. The princess was already dead. That is all. That is everything except the truth." Poirot moved closer, eyes bright as a surgeon's lamp. "Let us begin with the telephone call. The palace operator swears no external call was put through to your private house after 11 o'clock. Yet you claim the butler rang you from the West Wing extension at 12:03. Either the operator lies unlikely, or the call was made from inside the sealed wing itself, by you, perhaps, to yourself." Forslund's throat worked. "Absurd! Is it?" Poirot produced a small black notebook. "The gate log shows your motor car entered the palace grounds at 11:27 yesterday evening. It has not left since. You never went home, Doctor. You are already here, waiting." A bead of sweat traced the doctor's hairline and fell, darkening the collar of his white coat. "I often sleep in my rooms when the princess is indisposed." "Yet last night you told the footman you were summoned from home. You even produced a summons slip timed 12:03, written on your own prescription pad in violet ink, the same ink found on the death card, the same ink you use for your botanical sketches." Poirot opened the notebook to a page where a torn prescription sheet had been carefully pasted. "The paper is from the pad in your drawer. The handwriting is yours. You forged your own summons, then arrived breathless at 12:17 to discover a body that had been dead since 12:11, the exact minute every clock in the West Wing stopped." Forslund backed against the shelves. Glass bottles rattled like bones. "Coincidence! There is no coincidence, only design." Poirot's voice dropped to a murmur. "You stopped the clocks yourself, did you not? A simple matter, a pocket watch set fast, a long arm through an open transom window, a twist of the regulator on the master clock in the corridor. 10 minutes stolen from time itself, enough to establish that you were summoned after the murder, when in fact you were present during it." The doctor's eyes darted to the door, to the window, to the scalpel. Finding no escape, they returned to Poirot, wide and glassy. "Why would I kill her? She was my patient, your obsession," Poirot finished softly. "For 3 years you have prescribed sedatives for nightmares she did not have, until you began administering them. You cultivated gardenias in the palace hothouse under false names. You sent the Queen of Spades first, as a romantic gesture, then as a threat when she spurned you. You knew about the hidden compartment in the throne, because you treated the late Queen Mother and read her private letters while she slept. You knew the princess intended to expose you tonight." Forsland made a small animal sound. She promised to be discreet. She promised nothing. She wrote in her diary now missing, but fragments remain that the doctor who was supposed to heal her had poisoned her mind with drugs and her heart with hopeless love. She intended to dismiss you publicly, ruin you. Poirot stepped closer. So you acted. You entered her apartments at 11:55 wearing stolen shoes a size too small to confuse the footprints. You quarrelled. You stabbed her with the Italian stiletto you had carried for weeks, waiting for the moment. You arranged the gardenia and the card your signature, your madness. Then you stopped the clocks, telephoned yourself, and waited in this room until it was time to discover the body. Forsland's knees buckled. He caught the edge of the table, knocking the dissected gardenia to the floor. Petals scattered like snow. "I loved her," he whispered, "from the first time she came to me, trembling from nightmares of the throne. I could have made her happy. Away from palaces, from duty, from that vain aristocrat who would have destroyed her. I only wanted to set her free. By burying a dagger in her back." Poirot's contempt was gentle, almost pitying. "You set only yourself free, Doctor Free of Reason." He reached into his pocket and produced a small glass vial containing pale fibres. These were found caught on the coping outside the princess's window cotton wool soaked in chloroform. The exact mixture you use for minor surgeries. You carried it in case she fought back. She did not. She trusted you until the very moment the blade slid home. Forsland stared at the vial as though it contained his soul. Then, with astonishing suddenness, he lunged for the scalpel. Poirot was ready. A swift twist of the wrist and the blade clattered across the floor. Forsland collapsed, sobbing, face pressed against the scattered gardenia petals. "I stopped the clocks," he choked, "because I wanted those 10 minutes back 10 minutes when she was still alive, still looking at me with those eyes that saw everything except how much I loved her. I thought if I could make time stop, the world would stop, and she would be mine again." Poirot stood over him, motionless. "Time stops for no man, Docteur, not even for love." He opened the door. Bergström waited outside with 2 uniformed officers. Forsland did not resist when they lifted him. He walked between them like a sleepwalker, leaving a trail of crushed white petals on the marble. In the corridor, Poirot paused, breathing deeply, as though to rid himself of the smell of carbolic and despair. Hastings approached, face pale. So, it was the doctor after all. Poirot shook his head slowly. "Non, mon ami. It was never the doctor. But the confession. Confession of a man who wishes to be punished because he could not save her. Notice he did not deny forging the summons, stopping the clocks, cultivating gardenias. He admitted everything except the murder itself. Someone placed the chloroform fibres on the coping, knowing we would find them. Someone left the scalpel, where he would reach for it in despair. The doctor is guilty of madness, of unrequited love, of tampering with evidence after the fact. But the hand that held the dagger was steadier, colder, and far more calculating. He looked down the corridor toward the 2 remaining closed doors, Greta von Rosen's and the Baroness's now empty chamber. 2 women, he murmured, 1 key still missing, 1 gardenia yet to be accounted for, and a murderer who has eliminated everyone except herself. The lamps flickered. Somewhere a clock that had been rewound began to chime the half-hour, thin and uncertain. as though time itself no longer trusted the palace. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The little grey cells. Hastings, they are very close now. So close, I can almost smell the perfume of the serpent." Chapter 7. The Secret of the Velvet Throne. The velvet throne room lay in darkness now, the great chandelier extinguished, only a single candelabrum burning upon the dais, so that the ancient chair seemed lit from within by some cold, internal flame. The blood had been cleaned from the carpet, the body removed, yet the air remained thick with death, and older things waxed dust, and the iron memory of every coronation, every abdication, every whispered treason that had taken place beneath those carved serpents. Poirot stood alone before the throne, coat unbuttoned, hands clasped behind his back, staring at it the way a chess master stares at the final position before delivering mate. He had dismissed everyone guards, Bergstrom, even the faithful Hastings with a small imperious gesture that brooked no refusal. This was between him and the chair that had watched Sweden's history bleed for 600 years. Somewhere inside its blackened oak and faded crimson velvet lay the reason a princess had died tonight, and Hercule Poirot intended to make it speak. He began with the arms running sensitive fingers along the serpent's coils, pressing, twisting, listening for the click that is never accidental. Nothing, then the back, tracing every carved scale until his thumb found a slight irregularity beneath the gilt coronet, a raised rose no larger than a thumbnail. He pressed hard. A panel no wider than a prayer book slid aside with the soft sigh of well-oiled antiquity. Inside lay a leather pouch, dark with age, and within that a packet of letters tied with faded ribbon the colour of dried blood, together with a sealed document bearing the royal crest and the date 1918. Poirot carried everything to the candelabrum and read by flickering light, his face growing graver with each page. The letters were from the late Crown Princess Margareta, to a lover known only as V. Passionate, explicit, written in the desperate hours before her early death. They spoke of a child conceived outside marriage, hidden at birth, raised in secret for the good of the dynasty. The sealed document was an act of succession, drafted in utmost secrecy by King Gustav VI himself, declaring that should the direct line fail or marry beneath its station, the throne would pass to the illegitimate daughter of Crown Princess Margareta, and her lover, whose identity was left carefully blank, to be filled in only when the time came. Poirot whistled softly. So the velvet throne had guarded a bomb beneath its cushion for 17 years. Princess Ingrid's intended marriage to Count Axel Noble, but impoverished, would have triggered the secret act, disinheriting her in favour of the hidden heir. Someone had discovered the letters tonight. Someone who understood that Ingrid's death would keep the secret buried forever, or, more terribly, clear the path for the true claimant. He replaced the documents exactly, closed the panel, and stepped back. Only then did he notice the faint indentation in the velvet seat deeper on the right side, as though someone of slight build had sat there recently. Testing the weight of a crown. Silver lame fibres glinted among the pile. Someone wearing the princess's own spare gown had taken her place upon the throne after death, if only for a moment, to feel what it was like to be queen. Poirot's gaze travelled downward. Beneath the dais, almost invisible against the crimson carpet, lay a single white gardenia petal, fresh, dewed, deliberately placed. He picked it up and inhaled. The scent was unmistakable. Sylvestrum Augusta, but mingled now with something sharper chloroform, perhaps, or terror. He knelt, pressed his cheek almost to the floor, and sighted along the carpet toward the windows. There, caught in a crack between two parquet blocks, gleamed a tiny shard of mother-of-pearl. He teased it out with tweezers. The broken tip of a nail file, engraved with the initials GVR. Greta von Rosen had stood here, frantic, trying to pry open the compartment she knew existed but could not find. The petal had fallen from the gardenia she carried as both signature and trophy. Poirot rose slowly. Everything was falling into place with the precision of a watchmaker's wheel. The murderer had needed 3 things tonight. Access to the sealed wing, Greta had it. Knowledge of the throne's secret passed down, perhaps by a dying nurse or a careless maid, and a scapegoat for every clue. The baroness's, gardenias, the count's gloves, the doctor's chloroform, all gifts laid carefully at innocent doors. He turned to leave, then paused. One final test. He climbed the 3 shallow steps and sat upon the throne itself. The velvet was cold, the carved serpents pressing into his shoulders like living things. For a moment, he closed his eyes and imagined the weight of a crown, the loneliness of centuries, the terrible temptation to kill for it. When he opened them again, his face was very calm. "Oui," he murmured to the empty room. "I understand now why you did it, mademoiselle, and I understand why you must never wear this crown." He descended the dais, extinguished the candelabrum with a single breath, and walked toward the door. Behind him, the throne waited in absolute darkness, patient as fate. In the corridor, Hastings nearly collided with him. "Poirot! Where have you been? Bergstrom is frantic. Another gardenia has appeared, pinned to Greta von Rosen's door, with a second queen of spades." Poirot's smile was small and terrible. "Then let us go to the young lady at once. The serpent has shown its full length at last, and Hercule Poirot is ready to cut off its head." They moved swiftly through the palace, past guards who came to attention at the sight of the little Belgian's face. Dawn was still hours away, but the darkness felt thinner now, as though the palace itself sensed that the long night of secrets was ending. At Greta von Rosen's door, Poirot did not knock. He turned the handle unlocked and stepped inside. The room was lit only by the fire, and in its shifting glow, Greta stood at the window, clothed in a silver lame gown identical to the one the princess had died in, a white gardenia pinned at her breast. In her right hand, she held the missing brass key. In her left, the Italian stiletto cleaned of blood but still gleaming. She turned slowly, and for the first time Poirot saw her without the mask eyes, luminous with triumph and madness in equal measure. "You are too late, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "The throne has accepted me. I sat in it. I felt it welcome me. Ingrid was never the true queen. I am." Poirot regarded her steadily. "You are the daughter of Crown Princess Margareta, and her lover, oui. The letters prove it. But they also prove that your mother begged the king to destroy the act, rather than let a bastard her word, mademoiselle, not mine, ever sit upon that chair. You have killed for a birthright your own mother rejected." Greta's smile did not waver. "History is written by the living. Tonight I rewrote it." She raised the dagger. Poirot did not move. "You arranged everything with genius, the Baroness's gardenias, Axel's gloves, the doctor's chloroform, the stopped clocks, the forged summons. You walked the coping in Ingrid's spare gown, entered through her window, stabbed her as she knelt pleading for your friendship, arranged the scene, returned the same way, planted evidence like poisonous flowers. But you made one mistake." Greta's hand tightened on the key. There was no mistake. There was. You sat upon the throne. The velvet remembers pressure, mademoiselle, and it remembers that you weigh 3 kilos less than the princess because you are not yet carrying the child she discovered only yesterday. The child that would have made her marriage impossible and kept the secret safe forever. Greta went white to the lips. The dagger wavered. Ingrid was pregnant, Poirot said gently. By your brother, perhaps, or by another, it scarcely matters. She intended to tell you tonight, to beg your silence. Instead, you silenced her. And now the throne will never be yours, because Sweden will never accept a murderess who killed a royal mother and her unborn heir. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Greta screamed a terrible sound that echoed every scream the palace had ever swallowed and lunged with the dagger. Poirot stepped aside with the neatness of a dancer. Bergstrom and his men, waiting in the shadows, caught her before the blade found flesh. The key and the stiletto clattered to the floor together. As they led her away, Greta looked back once. "The throne wanted me," she whispered. "It spoke." Poirot bent and retrieved the fallen gardenia. Its petals were already browning. "Non, mademoiselle," he said quietly. "It only listened, and what it heard was madness." He crushed the flower in his gloved hand and let the fragments fall like snow. Behind him, the velvet throne waited in darkness, ancient, empty, and for the first time in centuries clean. Chapter 8. The Second Gardenia. The palace woke to a second scream, thinner than the first, the sound of a mind snapping rather than a life ending. It came from the grand staircase at 5:30, when the sky beyond the windows was still the colour of tarnished steel, and the chandeliers looked like frozen ghosts. A housemaid, sent to lay fires in the state apartments, had found it. A single white gardenia, pinned to the black velvet cloak Greta von Rosen had worn to dinner the previous evening. The cloak hung from the balustrade, exactly where the household staff draped evening wraps after balls. Yet no one had seen Greta return to the public wing after her arrest. Into the gardenia's heart had been thrust a second Queen of Spades. The corner bent the opposite way from the first, and on the back someone had scrawled in violet ink, "She was never the Queen." The news travelled faster than servants' footsteps. Courtiers emerged from their rooms in dressing gowns and fear, clustering at the top of the staircase like crows around carrion. By the time Poirot arrived, coat buttoned to the throat against the renewed cold, the gardenia had already been photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a crystal bowl of ice by Bergstrom's trembling men. Poirot lifted it to the light. The stem had been cut with the same nail scissors as the first bloom. The card was from the identical 1929 French deck. Yet this flower was fresher, the dew still clinging to its petals, as though it had been cut minutes, not hours, ago. "Impossible," Bergstrom muttered, face the colour of tallow. "Frucken von Rosen has been under guard in the Blue Salon since 6 o'clock yesterday evening. 2 officers and a locked door. She could not have left." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then either your officers are liars, or the murderer is someone else, entirely someone who wishes us to believe Greta guilty even after confession. Observe, the first gardenia was a signature of triumph. This second is a taunt. Someone plays with us as a cat plays with a half-dead mouse." He turned to the cloak itself. The black velvet was heavy, lined with silver fox now stiff with melted snow at the hem. Someone had worn it outside very recently. In the deep pocket, his fingers closed around a small object, a brass key, warm from recent handling, identical to the one found in the princess's pocket. The missing second key. "Mon Dieu," Hastings breathed. "Greta had an accomplice." "Or a rival," Poirot corrected softly. Someone who knew every detail of her plan and has now taken the stage alone. They followed the faint trail of melted snow along the upper corridor to a service door that opened onto the north terrace. Here the footprints were unmistakable. Narrow, high-arched, size 38 again, but lighter than Greta's, the stride shorter, almost dancing. They led across the terrace, down the snow-covered steps, and disappeared into the formal gardens, where the palace hothouse squatted like a glass coffin beneath the first pale suggestion of dawn. The hothouse door stood ajar. Inside, the air was thick with heat and perfume, rows of gardenias glowing white against the dark leaves like captive moons. One plant had been stripped bare. Only broken stems remained. At the far end, beneath a shattered pane where someone had smashed their way out rather than in, lay a woman's evening slipper of silver lame, soaked through, the crystal buckle missing. Poirot picked it up. The princess's spare pair, size 36. Yet the footprints outside are 38. Someone wore these over her own shoes to confuse the trail, then discarded them when the snow became too deep. He sniffed the insole. Gardenia oil, and beneath it chloroform. The murderer drugged herself lightly to walk the coping without fear, then heavier to leave no memory of the act. Bergstrom stared at the ruined plants. "But Greta is in custody. Who?" Poirot did not answer. He was staring at a small card propped against a broken pot. Another Queen of Spades, but this one had been torn in half and mended with blood-stained thread. On the back, in the same violet ink, "Third time pays for all." A bell began to ring from the palace urgent, panicked. They ran, servants scattered before them like frightened chickens. The Hall of Mirrors. The great doors stood open, and inside, upon the long table where state banquets were served, lay Baroness Ebba Silverström. She was fully dressed in the black lace and diamonds she had worn to dinner, seated upright in a high-backed chair as though presiding over an invisible assembly. Her cane lay across her lap. Her eyes were wide, filmed with death, and pinned to her breast with her own emerald brooch was a third white gardenia. A Queen of Spades had been placed in her rigid fingers, the face scratched out with something sharp. Beneath the table, almost hidden by the fall of her skirts, a hypodermic syringe glinted empty. Dr. Forsland knelt beside her, face grey. "Laudanum and morphine, massive dose, self-administered less than 20 minutes ago. She left this." He held out a sheet of heavy-crested notepaper. The handwriting was firm, aristocratic, final. "I have been the perfect scapegoat. The gardenias were never mine to give. They grew for a greater crime than age can forgive. The throne is poisoned. Let it stand empty until Sweden is ready for the truth. Tell the king I die as I lived, unbowed, unloved, and unrepentant. Ebba Silverström." Poirot read it twice, then folded it with care. "She did not write this," he said quietly. "The slant is wrong, the pressure too even. Someone forced her hand literally while the drug took hold. Observe the pinpricks on her wrist where the needle was inserted against her will." He looked around the Hall of Mirrors. 100 reflections of the dead woman stared back, multiplied to infinity. Somewhere in those reflections, the murderer still watched. Bergstrom was almost shouting now. "Then Greta escaped, or someone is copying her." "Neither." Poirot's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Greta von Rosen confessed to a murder she planned, but did not commit. Someone else held the dagger, someone who needed Greta to take the blame. When we closed in on Greta, that someone silenced the Baroness before she could speak the true name. And now they mock us with gardenias, because the game is nearly over." He turned to Forsland. "Doctor, you treated the Baroness for insomnia, yes? You prescribed the exact mixture in that syringe?" Forsland nodded numbly. "Then you will recognize this." Poirot produced the crystal phial found earlier in the Baroness's room. Empty now. The murderer used the Baroness's own medicine to silence her forever. He walked the length of the hall, stopping beneath the great chandelier where a single drop of blood, fresh, bright, hung from a crystal prism like a ruby. Someone had stood on the table to reach it. "3 gardenias," he said softly. "3 queens. The third has not yet appeared, but she will. And when she does, the velvet throne will claim its final victim." Outside, the sky had begun to pale. The snow had stopped falling. Somewhere in the palace, a clock struck 6, clear and cold and merciless. Poirot looked toward the west wing, where Greta von Rosen waited in her locked room, and beyond it to the empty throne that had watched everything. "The little grey cells, they are singing now, Hastings. One more act, and the curtain falls." He crushed the second gardenia in his fist, letting the bruised petals drift to the marble like white ashes. "Summon everyone," he said to Bergstrom. "The king, the suspects, the household, the Hall of Mirrors at 7 o'clock. Before the third queen plays her final card, Hercule Poirot will lay all the cards on the table, and one of them will be the Ace of Spades." Chapter 9. The Little Grey Cells. Assemble. The Hall of Mirrors at 7 o'clock was a cathedral of cold light. Dawn had finally broken over Stockholm, pale and reluctant, turning the chandeliers into frozen waterfalls and the hundreds of reflections into an army of silent witnesses. Every mirror showed the same scene multiplied to infinity. The long table where Baroness Silverstrom had died, now cleared and covered with black velvet. Upon it, the 3 gardenias in a crystal bowl. The 3 queens of spades laid in a neat row, the Italian stiletto cleaned and gleaming like an accusation. At the head stood Hercule Poirot, small, immaculate, green eyes blazing with the fire of certainty. They had all come. The king himself, gaunt in mourning black, the ribbon of the Order of the Seraphim across his breast. Crown Prince Gustav Adolf beside him, face carved from granite. Count Axel von Rosen, unshaven, eyes hollow. Dr. Forsland, trembling, spectacles fogged. Greta von Rosen, under guard yet strangely serene, wrists bandaged where she had tried to open her veins in the night. Inspector Bergstrom and 6 uniformed officers. Hastings rigid with anticipation. And finally, moving like a dark flame between the mirrors, Princess Sibylla Ingrid's cousin, 23 years old, silver blonde, dressed in mourning white that made her look like a bride of death. Poirot waited until the great doors closed with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Then he spoke, voice soft yet carrying to the furthest reflection. "Mesdames et messieurs, we are assembled to witness the end of a tragedy that began long before last night. A princess is dead, a baroness is dead, a throne stands empty, and somewhere among us walks the person who arranged every detail with the precision of a watchmaker and the cruelty of a surgeon. I speak, of course, of the murder of Her Royal Highness Princess Ingrid." He let the silence stretch until it screamed. Many hands have been accused. Baroness Silverstrom, whose gardenias became the signature innocent. Count Axel, whose gloves were stained with his fiancée's blood innocent. Dr. Forsland, who stopped the clocks and forged his own summons innocent of the blade. Even Greta von Rosen, who confessed to a crime she planned in every detail, yet never committed, also innocent of the final thrust. All of them puppets. All of them danced exactly as the true murderer pulled the strings. Greta made a small, strangled sound. Axel stared at Poirot as though he had gone mad. Poirot lifted the first Queen of Spades. This card was sent as a threat. The second appeared after the murder, the third after the Baroness's death. Each corner bent differently, each message in violet ink. Someone wished us to believe in a single madwoman obsessed with gardenias and playing cards. Someone wished us to look everywhere, except at the one person who had access to every locked room, every secret, every heartbeat of the palace. His gaze moved slowly across the assembly and settled on Princess Sibylla. You, mademoiselle? A collective intake of breath rippled through the mirrors. Sibylla did not flinch. She met Poirot's eyes with the calm of deep water. You are tired, monsieur. Grief makes fools of us all. Grief makes murderers of some, Poirot replied. Let us reconstruct the impossible crime. At 11:55, the princess quarrelled with Count Axel, heard by many. At 11:58, Greta left for the courtyard scene. At 12 Geschard precisely, you, Princess Sibylla, wearing Ingrid's spare silver lame gown over your own white one, walked the coping from your apartments in the East Wing, where you had remained officially all evening to Ingrid's window. The gowns together gave the illusion of one woman. You entered, found Ingrid alone, distraught, trusting. She knelt to you, she always knelt to you. Her older cousin, her confidant, and you stabbed her once, perfectly, with the stiletto you had carried beneath your cloak. You arranged the gardenia and the first Queen of Spades, cut earlier from the hothouse you alone had the key to, then returned along the coping, pulling up the knotted silk rope dyed silver to vanish against the lame. He lifted the second queen. When we began to suspect Greta your childhood friend, your accomplice in smaller cruelties, you placed this gardenia on her cloak, and the second card to seal her guilt. You drugged the Baroness with her own laudanum, forced her hand to write the suicide note, pinned the third gardenia to her breast, and left the torn card as your signature. You stopped the clocks yourself. You knew the master clock's location from childhood games. You forged the doctor's summons. You scattered fibres, petals, clues like rose petals, at a wedding that was always meant to end in a funeral. Sibylla smiled, small and cold. Pretty fairy tale. Proof? Poirot produced the crystal slipper found in the hothouse. Size 36 over your own 38. The left buckle is missing here, it is, caught in the hem of the white gown you wore beneath the silver. Your footprints in the snow were lighter, because you walked on the balls of your feet, dancer's training. And finally, he held up a tiny mother-of-pearl button. Torn from a white glove, this was found inside the hidden compartment of the velvet throne. You opened it last night, read the letters, understood that Ingrid's pregnancy would have triggered the secret act of succession in favour of Greta, not you. You killed to keep the throne empty until you yourself could claim it cleanly, without bastard rivals. The king made a sound like a man stabbed. Sibylla's composure cracked for the first time. She was going to throw it all away for a penniless count and a bastard child. Sweden deserves better. Sweden deserves better than a murderess, Poirot said quietly. She moved, then lightning fast, a silver flash in her hand. The missing crystal buckle, sharpened to a razor, slashed toward Poirot's throat. Bergstrom's men were ready. She fought like a cornered lynx, white gown tearing, blonde hair escaping its pins, until 4 officers pinned her to the black velvet table amid the scattered gardenias and queens of spades. Greta von Rosen began to laugh, high, broken, endless. Sibylla spat blood where someone's fist had struck her. "The throne will never accept you," she hissed at the king. "It remembers blood." Poirot looked at her for a long moment, something close to sorrow in his eyes. "Non, mademoiselle. It remembers everything, and tonight it remembers you." They dragged her away between the mirrors, her white gown now streaked with gardenia juice and blood, a fallen queen reflected into infinity. The king stood motionless, an old man suddenly, the weight of centuries crushing him at last. Poirot gathered the 3 queens of spades, tore them neatly in half, and let the pieces flutter into the crystal bowl like white and black petals. "The little grey cells, they have spoken," he said softly, "and the velvet throne is silent at last." Outside the windows, the sun rose fully over Stockholm, pale winter gold on fresh snow, and for the first time in 600 years, the ancient chair waited for no one at all. Chapter 10. The Velvet Throne Speaks. The Hall of Mirrors emptied slowly, as though the palace itself were reluctant to release its ghosts. Footsteps echoed and faded, doors closed with the finality of coffin lids. Somewhere far off, a woman sobbed without consolation. Only 3 remained beneath the chandeliers, now dulled to ordinary crystal. King Gustav V, pale as the snow outside. Hercule Poirot, motionless at the head of the black-draped table, and Captain Hastings, who stood a little apart, feeling suddenly that he had intruded upon a sacrament older and more terrible than any coronation. The king spoke first, voice cracked with age and unshed tears. "She was my niece, Poirot, blood of my blood, and I never saw the poison in her." He looked at the scattered fragments of the queens of spades, at the bruised gardenias already beginning to brown. "How did we come to this?" Poirot's answer was gentle. "Majesty, thrones are cold lovers. They promise everything and give only solitude. Princess Sibylla desired warmth. When it was denied, she chose fire. She would have burned the kingdom to sit upon its ashes." The king removed the seraphim ribbon from his breast and laid it upon the table as though it had become too heavy to bear. "And Ingrid, my granddaughter dead for a secret I myself created in 1918. I thought to spare the crown scandal. Instead, I fed it to monsters." He walked the length of the hall until he stood before the tallest mirror. For a long moment he studied his reflection, an old man in mourning black, eyes hollowed by more than grief. Then, deliberately, he turned his back on it. "The velvet throne will be removed," he said, "placed in the treasury vaults and never used again. Sweden will have a new ceremonial chair, simple oak, honest wood. Let the past rot with its serpents." Poirot bowed. "A wise decision, sire. Some thrones remember too much." Together they left the hall, Hastings following at a distance. In the west wing, the velvet throne room waited exactly as it had at midnight, save that the ancient chair now stood draped in black crepe, a silent widow. The king paused upon the threshold, one hand upon the doorframe as though steadying himself against centuries. "Will you come with me, monsieur?" he asked quietly. "I would have you witness the end." Poirot inclined his head. They entered alone. Sunlight, thin and winter pale, slanted through the high windows and fell across the dais in a single golden blade. Dust motes danced within it like tiny restless souls. The king mounted the 3 crimson steps slowly, each footfall muffled by the carpet still faintly stained despite scrubbing. At the top he turned and looked down at Poirot with infinite weariness. "My physicians say I have not long," he said. "Before I die, I would sit once more where my fathers sat, and ask forgiveness of the chair that has seen too much blood." He lowered himself onto the velvet. For an instant, the carved serpents seemed to writhe, as though recognizing their own. The king closed his eyes. "I crowned my son here," he whispered. "I received the news of Margaretta's death here. I signed the secret act here, believing I protected the future. Instead, I murdered it." A tear, astonishing in its rarity, traced the furrow of an ancient wrinkle. "Forgive me, old friend, I was never worthy of you." Silence answered deep, listening, absolute. Then, from somewhere within the ancient oak, came the faintest sound, a soft click, as of a panel sliding shut forever. The hidden compartment had sealed itself, taking its secrets beyond even Poirot's reach. The king rose, straighter now, as though a burden had been lifted rather than added. "It is done," he said. "The throne has spoken its last." He descended the steps and offered Poirot his hand, not the hand of a king, but of a man. "Sweden owes you more than it can ever repay." Poirot took it gravely. "Sweden owes only truth, sire, and today she has received it." They left the room together. Behind them, palace, servants entered with quiet efficiency, wrapping the chair in black silk, lifting it from its dais as though it were a bier. The crimson carpet was rolled, the windows shuttered. By evening, the velvet throne room would be an empty shell. Its purpose ended, its voice stilled. Later, on the palace balcony overlooking the inner courtyard now dazzling with fresh snow, Poirot and Hastings watched the sleigh that would carry them back to the Grand Hotel. The city lay white and hushed, church bells ringing the Angelus across the water. Hastings cleared his throat. "It's over then. Sibylla will be tried quietly, I suppose. Exile or a sanatorium." "Exile," Poirot confirmed. "The king is merciful. And Greta?" "She is asked to enter a convent in the north. The Baroness will be buried with full honours, her last revenge. Axel sails for Argentina next week. Dr. Forsland has resigned his post. He will tend lepers in Abyssinia, seeking absolution in fever and service." Hastings shivered, though the sun was climbing. And the child Ingrid carried? Lost with its mother. Some secrets die unborn, and perhaps that is mercy too. Poirot drew a small object from his pocket, the withered gardenia Axel had kept since the engagement. He crushed it between gloved fingers and let the fragments fall into the snow, where they vanished like sins confessed. "You know, Poirot," Hastings said slowly, "I still don't understand how Sibylla walked the coping in December without falling." Poirot smiled, the small cat smile that always meant more than it revealed. "Because she did not walk alone, mon ami. In the East Wing lives an old tightrope walker from the circus of her childhood, a woman who taught little princesses to balance above the world. Sibylla paid her in jewels and silence to hold the rope steady from a dormer window. Love and fear make acrobats of us all, but only fear makes them perfect." He turned up his astrakhan collar. "Come, Stockholm is beautiful, but she is cold, and Hercule Poirot has seen enough of cold thrones." Their sleigh bells jingled as they moved off through the gates. Behind them, the palace stood silent, a little lighter now, as though a long-carried curse had finally been lifted. High above the west wing, the velvet throne wrapped, sealed, forgotten began its journey to the vaults, carried by men who would never speak of what they bore. And in the empty throne room, sunlight slowly filled the space where the ancient chair had waited 6 centuries for the next sovereign. Dust settled. Snow tapped gently at the windows. Somewhere deep in the walls, wood creaked once, like a sigh of relief. The velvet throne had spoken its final word.